right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mina Vescera. I work for Cornell Cooperative Extension of Suffolk County. I'm their Nursery Landscape Specialist. When I initially was requested for the title of this talk, I came up with threats to our maritime beech forest, but not being from Long Island, and then started doing a little bit of a lit review about the beech forest on Long Island, there's more than one type. So I just decided to change the talk to threats to our beech forests here. So we'll learn about the different types of beech forests on Long Island. But before I start, I wanted to ask you all just 3 questions. So how many of you are familiar with American beech? And in any way, whether or not it's furniture that you have in your house, okay, firewood, or you've walked in a beautiful park. Okay, so about half of you. Okay, great. Okay, that was really fast. Okay. Next question regarding threats to this forest type. How many of you are familiar, either because you read about it or you've seen it? Are you familiar with the beech bark disease? Okay, so quite a few of you. All right, and then the next disease, the one that I've conducted some research in with colleagues, and that is definitely more of a recent disease, is beech leaf disease. Excellent. Okay, so about the same number of you. Okay, so now let's just dive in. So in terms of my interaction with the species beech, of course, childhood, loving growing up with the beech forests in New England, in Rhode Island. But professionally, here on Long Island, I've been here for about 11 years now, I get called out to site visits by arborists, by landscape professionals, more so for the European counterpart of the American beech, right? So European beech, Fagus sylvatica. And there are many different cultivars of this particular species. So many different forms, many different leaf colors. And when this tree is on your property, right, people fall in love with it. And it's wonderful to see and experience, right? People want to protect this tree at all costs. And you can understand why. We all, I'm sure many of you have your own memories of experiencing for the first time, a weeping beech tree. Reasons that I get called out for at least European beech is for this particular fungal disease. It's soil-borne. It's Phytophthora bleeding canker. And when people start seeing their tree bleeding, because it kind of does look like that, they want to make sure that this tree, which, when they're in their grand age, they can be 150, 200 years old, they want to make sure they prolong the life of this tree that they love so much. Now, Phytophthora bleeding canker can also affect American beech, but I've never been called out to a site visit for Phytophthora bleeding canker on American beech. Other reasons why that can affect negatively any type of beech species is, of course, cultural issues, right? Regardless of the species, beech trees, they don't tolerate compaction very well. They don't tolerate poor drainage. They like to have a nice, moist, kind of humusy soil environment. This particular example that you're looking at on the screen here is just a bad specimen. It never should have gone in the landscape to begin with. So prior to beech leaf disease being detected here on Long Island, my interaction with American beech was just as these kind of fragmented forests in the background, right? So here you have some American beech at North Fork Nursery over in Jamesport. And if I went to a property, on the North Fork or, on the South Fork, there would occasionally be beech trees in the background, but they weren't an active part of the managed landscape, right? For beech bark disease, I had one site visit with Margie, and you'll see an image of Margie soon. And it was more in a forested area. It wasn't really a part of someone's property. So out of the 11 years I've been here, pretty much all my site visits have been for European beech. Before I dive into the rest of this talk on American beech, I just wanted to give you some distinguishing traits for being able to tell American and European beech apart. Because if you go back to your house and you think, okay, I have a green form of this beech species, is it the American, is it the European? Sometimes it can be really tricky to tell the straight species apart. So there are 3 primary differences. If someone in the audience has another way that they like to tell them apart, please let me know. The primary difference is leaf-shaped margins and secondary veins. You may be looking at this picture and be like, well, what about the buds, the overwintering buds? Let's see if this thing works. You know, this is deceiving because the buds are very similar as well. So I don't think it's a very good way to tell them apart. So if we just focus on leaf shape, the base of the leaves tends to be a bit more uniform, so they say in literature, for American beech, where it's more V-shaped at the base of the leaf, and for the European beech, it has both V-shaped and U-shaped leaves. But to me, at least to my eye, for this particular example, you know, that looks pretty U-shaped to me. So I don't think it's the best. But then the leaf margins, I think, is a pretty good way, along with the secondary veins, to distinguish the species. So for the American beech, they're coarsely serrated, so you have both big teeth and little teeth at the margins. And then for the European beech, you kind of have that nice wavy effect around the margin of the leaf. And for the veins, American beech has more pairs coming off the mid-vein versus the European beech, which has fewer. And they say the European beech is also kind of has these very fine hairs, and this picture shows it very well along the margin. But if American beech is leafing out, you can also see those fine hairs. So, you know, it just depends. Even when you spend a lot of time with these, like when Margie and I, we've been staring at American beech leaves and buds quite a bit these last 6 years, I even still say, wait a minute, you know, if I'm at an arboretum, you know, most of them are labeled, but it can be tricky to tell the straight species apart, in my opinion. All right, so now let's just focus on Fagus grandifolia, the American beech. In terms of its distribution across the United States, currently it's focused just on the eastern part of the United States. But historically, you know, thousands of years ago, if we're just focusing on the US, it used to extend all the way to the western seaboard. The two different types of beech forests, initially I thought there was just one, then I thought there was three, but then, you know, I reviewed the Natural Heritage Program website again, and there's two oak beech forests here on Long Island. So that beech maritime forest and then the coastal oak forest. And they certainly, you know, intermingle with each other as well. So that beech maritime forest is just this narrow band right along that north shore along the bluffs, right? So not a very extensive forest category, and it's pretty unique to the coastal regions. Then that coastal oak forest is just kind of those more coastal lowlands, as it says. And it's not just unique to Suffolk County, it's also Richmond County. And again, not being from New York, I have no idea where Richmond County is. Here's an example of that beech maritime forest. So this is Wildwood State Park. I'm going to try and move out of the way here so you kind of really take that in. I know probably many of you are from Long Island and you've experienced this, but to me, this is just beautiful, and it's such a unique habitat to experience. And I love kind of the shifting sand effects and that these trees can actually tolerate those shifting sands. And in this example, you know, you have some oaks and you also have some various beech trees within here as well. And this is right along the top of the bluff here. The ocean is just right there. Or, sorry, not the ocean, the Sound. I know Long Islanders don't like to call the Sound the ocean. This, on the right-hand side, this is Wildwood State Park as well, but just, you know, a few feet, basically, inland. And at Wildwood, it's a pretty fantastic place to explore, you know, especially if you're into plants, because not only do they have these magnificent beech trees, they also have a wonderful diversity of oak species as well, and also hybrid oaks that are present there, too. On the left-hand side is the John P. Hume's Japanese Stroll Garden. Has anybody been there? Yeah, beautiful site. I haven't been there since 2019, and I want to go back this year because, you know, when I took this picture, I was aware of beech leaf disease, right? And I didn't observe it at this particular park, but I'm sure it's there now, so I'm really curious to see what the trees look like today. And this is what I initially thought would be like a maple beech mesic forest, but I learned that that forest isn't here on Long Island. So this is just another remnant piece, more inland in Nassau County, of a coastal oak beech forest. And I love this picture because, you know, it shows the mother trees and how they dominate the canopy. There's other species here as well. But then it has the saplings, and you have that beautiful layered effect. So when I think of beech forest, this is usually what I picture in my mind. Now we're going to review some of the threats to the beech forest. So when you read about threats to these type of rare forests, habitat loss, right? These are the type of things that you can learn about that are affecting these very rare forest types. This was a site visit back in 2021, and you can see there's been a lot of pruning that's happening here. This should be a maritime beech forest, but these trees were pruned legally. They got a permit, and they cut them all down to about, 5 feet. So this is certainly a threat, I feel, to this forest type. I haven't been back to this particular location since 2021, so I'd be curious to know if these are dead. I'm surprised they were able to survive this type of pruning. They didn't do it every year. I think they did it every few years, but certainly the most severe pruning I've ever seen to maintain a view. This particular table I got from a Morton Arboretum publication, the Conservation Gap Analysis of American Beech, and they didn't include beech leaf disease because I think they must have created this table before beech leaf disease was considered a major threat. So again, these are biotic. These are from living organisms. You'll notice armillaria root rot, some other pests and diseases that are listed, and the number underneath is associated with the severity that this pathogen or pest has on the tree. So it's 1113, but then beech bark disease is 8. And if you look down here, I'll just read it. The severity of the agent's impact is significant mortality of mature host trees, 25% to 95%. So that's quite a range. That's the first thing that kind of jumps out to me. But I was talking to Marjorie Daughtry, who's the plant pathologist with the Long Island Horticultural Research and Extension Center. I was asking her, since I've only ever had one site visit with beech bark disease on Long Island, and you don't really see it when you're driving around, and it's noticeable, beech bark disease is noticeable even if you're just driving around. And she said it's not that prevalent on Long Island. Throughout its range, it is prevalent, but it's not terribly prevalent here on Long Island, which is a good thing, right? Because in terms of the impact of this disease on beech trees, it's been significant. It's been around for a very long time. It can kill trees. 50% of mature trees can die, but sometimes 90%. It probably just depends on the health of the particular tree. But good news is that there are individuals that are resistant to this particular disease complex, right? So it's called a disease, but it's more of a complex in terms of how the disease develops. So here you have this kind of whitish look to these trees that normally have kind of a grayish look. I know this looks gray, but probably in person it looks more white. And what this is a scale. And there's 2 species of scale, I believe, that are associated with this disease. So there's a non-native one, and then there's a native one as well. And so they colonize the bark of these trees, and they create injury to that bark. And so with that injury, you're able to get colonization by fungus. So there's a few different fungal bark canker species that colonize the tree. I just listed one here. And basically, as you get that population of that fungus across all those, the injury on this trunk, you get this cankering that occurs, and the cankering girdles that vascular tissue. And so the tree just kind of, it lives, probably it's not thriving, and eventually it dies. So this is the type of beech tree that I grew up with in Rhode Island and across New England. This is what I was used to seeing. So when I moved here in 2013, and saw beech trees like this, I was like, oh, now I understand why people describe the bark of American beech as having elephant-like trunks. It completely looks like a leg of a humongous elephant, very smooth. So it's a beautiful sight to see, especially when you grew up with trees that were infested with scale and were suffering from beech bark disease. So again, very serious disease, but not so much here on Long Island. But then, beech leaf disease came. And I'm gonna just really breeze through this because I don't really have enough time to go through everything that has been learned about this disease. It is brand new to the world, right? Every single disease and what have you is brand new to the world at one point. So this was brand new to the world back in 2012. In the United States was its first detection. And after many years of study, they realized, at least currently, that the pathogen is a nematode. And the nematode was previously unknown as well, hadn't been identified, was never considered a pest to plants prior to it infecting beech leaf disease. So this map is likely outdated from January 2023, but you can see, so in 2012 was the first occurrence of this disease. and it just started spreading eastward. And now there are certainly more counties that it's been identified in Vermont and also other counties that aren't listed here. So 2012 all the way to, this is 2022, but it just keeps on spreading. And real quickly, the way it spreads is through air movement. This disease likes humid environments. So if you see an infected tree, the lower branches will be more severely infected than as you move up through the canopy of the tree. I was listening to a webinar from researchers across the country, and they're finding that movement of this nematode, besides wind and rain, this nematode loves water, animals, right? Birds, insects. There's one graduate student that found these nematodes on the backs of caterpillars, in spider webs, on spiders. So it's just everywhere. So movement of this pest is quite easy. This map is from this fall, so I'm sure, again, this year they may see movement across other counties within New York. But you can kind of see the initial detection was all the way in that western part of the state, and now it's just been, moving. I guess it started in the most humid environments, dare I say, I don't know, or along water. They still don't quite understand, or maybe it has to do with movement of nursery stock. But 2019 all the way in Western New York, or rather 2018 in Western New York, and then 2019 it was detected here on Long Island. And it was found from a forester, John Wernett, and then also an arborist, Evan Dachau of Jolly Green. They noticed that these beech remnant forests, they first noticed it in American beech and not in European beech. They noticed that the canopies were thin. And with American beech, that shouldn't be the case. They have very beautiful thick canopies. So they started noticing some funky symptoms. And this disease has very particular symptoms. They're very noticeable after a certain progression of the disease. So initially what you notice, because you're looking up at these gorgeous trees, are these striped leaves. And these dark stripes are very noticeable. So this disease is also, they're calling this nematode a gall-forming nematode. And so this is technically or biologically a gall that's formed in between these two secondary veins. And essentially what you have in there are a lot of nematodes, right? So this is one of the primary symptoms here that people tend to notice besides the thin canopy. You also end up with these rugose or really distorted, thick, leathery leaves. And that is an indication that the population of nematodes was incredibly high within that leaf and then also within that bud that had overwintered. So you end up with bud death as a result of this disease. And that's awful for this particular species because if you have thousands of these nematodes overwintering within that bud, they're active in there. It's not like they're sleeping, maybe sometimes they sleep, but they're causing damage to that bud. And so if there's thousands upon thousands within one bud, then the probability of that bud dying is very high. And with beech trees, their response to losing their canopy is they will put out a second flush of leaves, right? If their first flush, they realize nothing's happening, usually about a month later, they'll put out this nice flush of beautiful leaves. But there's only so long that this can happen. So in terms of a common name for this disease, I feel like beech bud disease is another great name for it because it not only slowly kind of kills the leaves of the plant, but it's killing the buds. And so that's a huge blow to this tree. So kind of the simple life cycle of this nematode is it overwinters in the buds, it makes its way to the leaves in mid-spring, it really starts populating and reproducing within that leaf throughout the growing season. And then right now they think around the beginning of September, at least for our area, it makes its way into the buds to overwinter. So they're still learning a lot though about this particular system. 3 to 6 years for mortality. Saplings die a lot faster than the big mother trees. And all species of beech are affected to some degree. American beech seems to be more severely affected. This is Marjorie Daughtry, in case some of you don't know. So she has been with Cornell University at the Long Island Horticultural Research and Extension Lab for like over 40 years. And she's just incredible to work with and a wealth of knowledge. So she and I have been last 6 years especially, doing all sorts of surveys and pilot trials of studying beech leaf disease. So I'm going to review some of the trials that we've been doing. Here's Evan Dacko on the left, his father Bob Dacko, at that first location that was noticed of this disease. So the forest there, incredibly thin when they first realized something was going on with the American beech in this private property at head of the harbor. So we were probably walking in about the third or maybe even the fourth year that that disease had been present, right? Because that first year, it's really hard to detect the disease. So if we look at an aerial, we just set up various, we selected various trees. It can be hard to conduct a trial within a forest because you want to reduce variability as much as you can. So you want to make sure the trees within your treatments and across the entire trial are all similar in caliper size and in height and in health. So that can be really challenging. But we just set up a real simple trial. We tested soluble fertilizer. Abamectin is a product that is effective against mites and insects, but it does have some activity against nematodes. This was foliar application. And emamectin benzoate, we did, not we, but Evan, did trunk injections on some of the trees. And this is a product that has been highly effective against emerald ash borer and also some other important pests to forest trees as well. So this was just 1 year, 1 or 2 that this study was done, and there have been no changes within that canopy, but Margie and I are still kind of monitoring that situation. At Wildwood in 2020, Margie and I decided to select a tree, tree 41. I know it's really difficult to see. I tried to kind of outline it a bit here in the understory. When we learned about beech leaf disease in 2019, it was past leaf out. You know, and there still wasn't that much known or understood about the disease. So we're like, okay, let's make sure we pick out a tree at Wildwood and monitor it before leaf out all the way through the growing season until November and beyond. And so that's what we did. We showed up weekly and we took pictures of various stems that we marked, and we just identified these symptoms. So here you have May 13th, and you can clearly tell where those galls are on those leaves, right? You can tell which ones are more severely affected. Same leaf setup, some deer browse did occur, which was very annoying, but October 22nd, what we learned by observing it through the entire growing season was that there was no increase in bands over the course of that growing season. So that's important to know because it's important to teach the landscape professionals and what have you that we worked with, you know, land managers. When you take samples of the leaves and of the buds, and then you look at them under a microscope, that's when you can really see the vector, the pathogen. So these kind of white strands here that almost look like hairs, these are the nematodes. And they're coaxed out of these leaves pretty easily with water. Thankfully, it's not difficult to get this nematode out of the leaf. Again, they're learning a lot about this leaf. You may think, oh, this is a foliar nematode. No, it's not. They don't call it a foliar nematode because it doesn't behave, if I can even use that word, like other foliar nematodes do. But it does spend a lot of its time within the bud and within the leaves. As far as we understand, there's no part of its life cycle in the soil. So again, if you apply water to this leaf, if you do a cross-section of it, and it's a heavy populated leaf within those bands, you can see what the actual pathogen looks like. So here on the left-hand side of the screen, folks at the Beltsville Agricultural Research Station with the federal government were able to take these fantastic images of a cross-section of a beech leaf. On the right-hand side, it's just an illustration, right? Yeah, sorry, I'm gonna move out of the way. I wanna stand in the middle of my presentation. All right, so nice healthy structure you have here, right? So here's the center vein. You have the different mesophyll cell structures, the lower and upper epidermis, and then there you even have the stomates there. So if I remove this illustration, here's a cross-section of a leaf that is heavily populated with these nematodes, right? And what do? They destroy the cell structure of that leaf. So that's how you end up with these leaves that are completely deformed and don't look anything like the healthy leaves. And so if you have a leaf that's populated, especially with many, many bands, and especially being deformed, the functionality of that leaf decreases. And so the plant isn't able to actually photosynthesize and produce those sugars that it needs to. So now jumping ahead to 2021 and 2022, Peconic Land Trust received funding to conduct some trials to test various pesticide products. There's 2 forest preserves in Amagansett that they thought that one site didn't have the disease, one site did, but it turned out they both had it. Again, it's just really difficult to sometimes find the symptoms. Mike Gaines is an arborist and a pesticide applicator, and since the beginning, he's been tracking this disease, and he's been taking some fantastic pictures of the nematode and really being on top of learning about the movement of this nematode from the leaf to the bud, going from summer to fall. So at these particular sites, we installed various treatments. So in 2021, this was the initial treatment area, which received several different pesticides. When I came in actively in spring of 2022, I set up the control trees, and then I added 2 more treatments. So here, we're just gonna call these the injected trees with that emamectin benzoate. And then we have control trees, and then we tested a product called Agrifos, and also saplings that were tested with a product called abamectin, the foliar application. I'm not gonna read through this, but the goal of applying these pesticides is just to reduce that population over time, right? Over in the summer, in 1 year. Because these products are not practical for forest management. These products are more practical if you have small remnant forests in your backyard, or if you have these specimen trees that you want to save. So this is that emamectin benzoate, that Avid product, which active ingredient abamectin, and then the Agrifos, which other studies show that after 6 years was effective of protecting young saplings, but in 1 year it's not effective. So none of these products have been found to be effective. And that's not just my studies, that's other people's studies as well. If we just focus on this one table and we look at percent leaf cover, you'll notice in June, good percent leaf cover, to October, there's really no difference across these treatments or comparing them to the control. When I came back in May 2023, huge reduction in percent leaf cover, and that was partly due to a winter moth infestation. So you have other confounding factors, right, that can affect it. When I did come back in June 2023, the percent leaf cover was much greater. I mentioned that it's pretty easy to coax the nematode out of the plant. There's various ways to do it now, but one way is just to simulate a rainfall event. And so after 2 days, you just collect water from these cups. You look at them under the scope, and the nematodes are actually quite huge compared to other nematode species. They wiggle about, so it's pretty easy to kind of tell what's there. And then these are the eggs, and these are the nematodes. And when they're dead, they still come out of the leaf, and they're ramrod straight. So there's a lot more questions than answers. There's a lot of scientists studying this disease, so I think we'll know a lot more about it, timing of applications. There are some products that have been found to be effective within one growing season where they reduce the population of nematodes, because that's what you want to do, is reduce the population of nematodes in one growing season, because you don't want the nematodes to overwinter in the bud and wreak havoc in those buds and kill them. And there are actually some studies underway now to evaluate resistant specimens, so I think that's very, very exciting. Real quick, before we end this, I just wanted to review some of the ecology, the importance of American beech, right, to our region. If you do some initial research yourself, you may notice that some foresters or forest managers consider this species a nuisance. And that's because of those saplings that overtake the understory. American beech, it's shallow-rooted. It is susceptible to injury to those roots. And the way the tree responds is by sending up these saplings. These saplings can easily tolerate low light conditions. They love it. But if you have a canopy that's been influenced by beech leaf disease, suddenly the canopy opens up. That's when those saplings are no longer going to thrive. And then when you have deer pressure, and the deer eat primarily all the maples, all the oaks, they kind of eat the beech, then you start questioning, well, what's going to happen to the regeneration of the forest, right? So lots of interesting things in terms of what's going to happen. Again, I'm not an ecologist, so when I was kind of reading up on the importance of American beech, I thought this was really interesting that the early hair-streaked butterfly is a rare butterfly, and 2 species, in New York State at least, is its host, American beech and then the beaked hazelnut. Beaked hazelnut, according to the New York Flora Atlas, is not present here on Long Island. American beech is, but of course the American beech is threatened. So what happens to this beautiful butterfly? If anybody has seen this butterfly, I'd love to know. I'm going to try and pay attention to it as well. Beech nuts, incredible important source of food for wildlife, right? Higher in protein than the oaks, and many different species of animals use them. But you have to wait 40 years for a beech tree to actually start producing these beech nuts, okay? And then you have to wait 60 years before you get a significant crop of these beech nuts. So beech trees are much more slower growing than oak trees, right? It's good to have that diversity within a forest system. And in terms of mast years, anywhere from 2 to 8 years, you'll get that mass production. Flowers are vulnerable to frost, so you may not even get a good year. There's a lot of vulnerabilities that this forest is experiencing. So when I question, well, what would happen? What's going to happen to these forest types here on Long Island? They're so important, they're so vulnerable, and I think the question is, who knows? Or if there's, a botanist in the room, maybe somebody can enlighten us. But I took this picture at Wildwood State Forest because lots of deer there, and I was happy to see a little oak sapling present. But there is certainly a lot of American holly present in the understory. And I question, okay, is that going to take up the gaps in the understory? What's actually going to happen? So lots of questions, and that's the end of my talk. And I hope I've, made you all curious about it as well. So thank you very much.
Got a couple of minutes for questions.
My name is Daniel Carpin. I live in Huntington, and my soils are fairly moist. I have beech trees 10 to 30 feet high, 2 to 7 inches diameter, young, 10 to 30 years old. And the amount of damage I've had on the leaves last spring, was about 10 or 15% of the total area of the leaves. And Mina, if you'd like to come and look at my beech trees, you're more than welcome to
Margie and
visit.
I, maybe we already have, no.
I don't
sure,
think so.
Yeah, just reach out and we'll come check them out.
But it's fairly moist soils, and maybe I've seen beech on sandy soils just gets decimated. So maybe the soil moisture in the spring has an effect on how much of this nematode gets into the leaves.
Yeah, that's a great question. This nematode definitely, I think, thrives under wet conditions, right? So one year we had a really droughty year, a droughty summer, and did that affect the movement of that nematode? But the population seems to be so high within our forests and within these managed landscapes as well. It's like, well, how many years do you need of these drier conditions in order to make an impact on this nematode? So we're still learning. But when I was reading up on this species, I thought it was really interesting that American beech uses twice as much water compared to oak trees, right? But yet they populate the same forested environments. That beech maritime forest, yeah, it seems like it would be such a dry environment. So maybe climate change is also going to be another confounding factor that's going to negatively impact beech.
I also noticed that the damage occurs early in the spring, and once the damage occurs, it stops. It doesn't continue all summer long.
Exactly, and that's what we had observed as well, except the damage is still occurring, you just can't see it, because those nematodes are reproducing, and if they make their way into the buds, that's where you can end up with increasing thinner canopies. So the nematodes will, unfortunately, continue thinning out your trees, unless you apply some of these products that do reduce it, but some of the products that have been effective against it had to get a special local needs label in order for it to be used on Long Island because there were water quality issues with the product. So I do have a fact sheet. I'll leave it out by the registration table if anyone is interested in learning about the products that you can apply.
Yeah, time for one more. John?
Okay. Yeah, great presentation, Mina. Thank you. Quick question. Well, coming into spring songbird migration, I was wondering when you showed the one photo of water on the leaves, the nematodes came out, are they large enough to be visible to sharp-eyed songbirds like warblers? To be able to feed on them?
Great question.
I'm just wondering through time if they might be able to have some
Probably, because if there's, in those cups that I showed you, I was taking 50 milliliters of what's at the bottom of those party cups and putting it in a beaker. And if there were a lot of nematodes present, you could see them, at least it looked like you could see them. So
a lot of those warblers are foliage gleaners, so they might be able to.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I have not, because on these webinars that I pay attention to, it's like all these research working groups, they have definitely studied birds and what buds the birds are eating. Okay. But so far, not what the birds are seeing. So that's a really interesting question, yeah. All right, thanks everyone.
Thanks, Mina.